All right, welcome to our regular February 20th board meeting 2025, Marysville Exempted Village School District. And we've been in session and executive session since 5, so we'll just start out with the Pledge of Allegiance. So if you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now I need a motion to adopt the agenda for this evening.
So moved.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded. We adopt this motion or agenda. Any discussion? All in favor?
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Kay?
Yes. And now at this point, we have some recognitions, Merit of Scholarship finalists.
Yes, if the board would like to go to the front row, I think Mr. Bennett is here tonight from Early College to do an introduction.
So I get the honor tonight to recognize our National Merit Scholarship finalists. So if anyone's not sure what the National Merit Scholarship is, this is one of those things that is only for seniors. So I had to do a little math on this and look it up. It looks to me like there are 3.9 million seniors in the United States this year. Of those 3.9 million seniors, 15,000 of them are National Merit finalists. So this is a prestigious award. This is not just one of those, participation awards that we hand out. This is truly some of the best in the nation. So we had 2 finalists this year, Andrew Michael Montgomery, who could not be here tonight, and then Alexi Fernandez Busto, who is here with us tonight.
I don't see our Employee of the Months here, so if you want to come back, I will just read their nominations. This month, we're actually recognizing the January Employee of the Month as well as the February. If you remember, our timing was a little off when we came back in January. So first, it's my pleasure to recognize Jackie Lewis, who is a nurse at Bunzold Middle School for Employee of the Month. Jackie was nominated for her dedication to students as well as staff at Bunzold. She is one who you can count on to remain calm and do the job that needs done. If I ever have a question about something medical, she is always willing to help and answer any questions that I may have. She is a wealth of knowledge and a true asset to the students at Bunzold. So congratulations to Jackie. And February Employee of the Month is Denise Dunn, who's food service at Mill Valley Elementary. Denise is very devoted to our district as she works on a split shift between SAC as a program assistant and then performs her head cook duties during the midday, working from 6:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day. This is a great example of someone who loves our students. Thank you, Miss Denise, AKA Dunny. So congratulations.
Okay, and that takes us to public participation. I assume there's none.
We don't have any.
Okay. And now we're to presentations, HPM.
We are ready.
We are ready.
We're going to give you an overview of our plan so far. As you know, we had a community meeting last month, I guess, now, yes. And we've had the survey out for a while with 3 different options. So tonight is about kind of giving you a review of the feedback of those options and to talk about our next steps as we move forward.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. Usually when I'm at this presentation, there's a lot of people start showing up because names are named, but, and I got to think back to that community meeting. I would like to say when it was cold, but it's still cold. I mean, it's not going to get warm. So thanks again for having us here tonight. Matt Sachs is here with me, and if you haven't met Matt, and you may have, Matt is our GIS analyst, but he runs kind of all the data in the background and kind of runs day-to-day communication with Jonathan. And then, you know, when we're in meetings, he gets everything prepared for us. So just a little process update for you. You know, we started this in a discovery phase, doing adequacy assessment, condition assessments, and all your enrollment and demographic work, which is really taking a look comprehensively at your district, all the way from buildings to programs. You know, I've shared with you and we've shared with your community that, you know, we really try to root these facilities plans in our programs and what we are offering students. It's not just about bricks and mortar. And I feel like this is a really strong part of the planning that we do. So also then that goes into validation, you know, looking at your educational framework, you know, what the district has a vision for in the future, anything from, as you'll see tonight, grade configuration to school size to program offerings and how we're going to offer those. Developing those standards so we can align to those standards and measure the buildings against those standards and measure our options and recommendations against those standards. And then, you know, making sure that we have the data right, creating that State of the Schools report, which has been posted for several months now. The community should have it in their hands, and our community task force has used it as their kind of data go-to for everything that they look at. And so as we've gone through this also, we've worked with a community task force that has been very engaged in this. It is, you know, we schedule our meetings for 2 hours, but it's hard to get out in 2 hours because they're just so engaged in the data and want to make sure that they're developing the right pathways for the school district, and they're genuinely interested in improving facilities to support the programs and the future students and teachers of your district. And so we are now in what we call the options phase. And so we're just finishing up this options phase with this community meeting, getting ready to start into our recommendations phase. But we want to give you this update, you know, get some feedback, and then show you where we're going to go from here. So the survey results, let's start here. So our survey results, first of all, we want to show you that there was really good participation across the board from all schools and all representatives. And you can kind of see the numbers out there. You know, even, you know, Creekview is a big participant in this. Even about 115 of our friends from up north in Raymond were able to participate in this. And I will share with you at the community dialogue, Raymond was very well represented at our community meeting. So I was happy to see those folks come into town to make sure that their voice is heard and they're seeing some results of this plan as it moves forward too. So also, who participated, and you know, you always like to see all that community participation, but I start to look to see, well, we did get a student on board, so that was good news, but I like to see 25% of our participants were teachers in this survey. And so that's good to know that the teachers are participating in this, and you know, it's their kind of livelihood on the line too from the environments they're going to work in. So overall, we had just over 600 responses to this. As you go through the survey, you're going to see that the numbers don't always add up to 600 because people sometimes just won't answer an answer, and we can't explain why, they just don't. But overall, 605 individual walkthroughs through this survey. So let's go through the options. So the first option was basically to keep the district as it is in its current portfolio, with just looking at maintenance and renovation over time. This is kind of almost what we call our do nothing option. It's just kind of maintaining, keeping the district as it is, with the exception of converting Raymond to a K-6 to increase enrollment at Raymond and reduce the enrollment at Creekview. You know, obviously you're going to see some pressures as you see in the enrollment. You're going to see some pressures in those middle grades in the next few years from your enrollment growth. And so just trying to provide some relief there. A lot of the ideas that you see that come around Raymond's grade configuration are really about, transportation and keeping the community together for a little longer and those kind of things. So I think that that's where you're going to see some of those, why we did that. For full transparency, we discussed K-8 up there. We discussed all kinds of different options to see. And it's interesting what we learned just sitting with people and hearing back from even that community. And I'll show you some of that. I don't know why that went forward. I'm going to have to go back. How do I go back? There we go. So pre-K at all elementary schools is in this option. A minimum of 2 self-contained special ed rooms at each elementary school. And then making sure that, but we also knew that the projected 28-29 enrollment would exceed the capacity. So doing nothing just means your buildings are going to be overcrowded in this option. There would be a district-wide boundary review on this, and there would have to be to try to balance that overload at some schools. And looking forward at that, that exceeded capacity is just something that you'd have to get through. And I don't think even at this point where 28-29 comes into play, even if there was, depends on when the board decided if there was going to be an ask or if there's going to be an ask, if that's going to be soon enough to make sure we get in front of that. And so there might have to be some solutions even around that. But if the results of this, what we saw in this kind of, and even though it was by far the least expensive route, and left a lot of dollars open, retires a lot of your debt that you're going to retire in a few years. You saw that in here, we see that the do not supports kind of outweighed, and just barely, but outweighed the support of this option. I think that community recognizes the need for continuous facilities improvement and also the need for capacity in your school buildings as this district is going to continue to grow. Now I will continue to say this, you are an anomaly. There's no districts out that are growing and you are growing. And it's kind of a unique position to be in to see where, that's an issue, where other districts are struggling with getting enrollment and that's their issue. And so it's something that's going to have to be dealt with, I'm sure, as we walk through this plan. And we're going to have to figure out as we move forward what the pathways are and if funding can't come through, what are solutions? And that has to be part of a facilities plan for you. And so as we talked before, developing a plan like this has 2 pathways. It has a pathway of you don't get any extra dollars coming in. So what do? Prioritize your maintenance, prioritize how much money you have going to that, and then you prioritize how you get capacity aligned with your student enrollment and balance of enrollment. So that has to be a pathway in a facilities master plan. The other pathway is obviously a funding solution. If the board chooses someday to go for an ask of a facilities bond, then there's a pathway for that also. And so we have to show both paths to the community. To show them what their options are and let the board and the community kind of weigh those options out there. And I think that's a really good pathway for a community to be prepared either way as you walk into this. So some of the comments, some interesting comments in here that I think that we pulled out. People do recognize it doesn't address your long-term growth and in this option. And there was quite a few comments around that. There is concern that Raymond doesn't have enough space for 2 more grade levels. Well, I think that's going to be the case for the same grade levels in most schools as your enrollment grows. There's also that concern, and I think this was a big concern from people that we heard from the Raymond community that showed up at community meetings too, is that there's not really an interest in joining at 7th grade into a grade configuration feeder. And so doing a K-6 up there, although seems like a good benefit to keep people, the community together longer and a school together longer, people saw that as a detriment to get integrated into the rest of the school district at a different grade level. Questions about separating pre-K program. And I think the administration probably has the same concern. When you look at a pre-K at all school buildings, resources get spread thinner because you have to house them at every school. And having 2 kind of units there instead of grouping them into larger groups sometimes is a strain on your resources. And so, and we all know the challenges of hiring all levels of teaching today, and especially in the special needs community, we're seeing less and less availability of qualified teachers coming into that, unfortunately. And so this is something we should consider, when we're thinking about this. And then, really questions about, the district's responsibility for pre-K. And, we all know that, there's extensive research on early childhood intervention and not abandoning that, but it's a matter of affordability too. Making sure that it's not just a matter of operations, but how you house pre-K as you have a growing enrollment. So option 2, this is keeping the existing configuration with some replacement and new construction on the table. This would actually replace an Edgewood Elementary, an aging facility. Again, I think there's some questions about the annex. It's a newer part of the building. I don't think we would consider replacing that. I think we would replace the core of the building. And a new elementary school that would be constructed at 600 capacity. Okay, and one thing we didn't do is we really didn't identify location. We do know that, at your middle school site, it is a site that was built or developed to hold another school someday. So maybe it's there, maybe it's somewhere else, but that is something that we would work through if this was an option that went forward. Again, Raymond being converted that case 6 with some partial demolition and new construction, increasing that capacity to 400. Another piece to this is that every Raymond option, I should have mentioned this in the first one, every Raymond option has an option to build a bus barn and kind of 1 bus or 2 bus depot up there with a gas station or gas pump and a garage, to which in the upfront cost money, but in the long-term operations saves you a ton of money operationally over the life of that. And so not having to traverse buses all the way from Marysville up to the Raymond area, having a single bus barn, and 1 or 2 bus barns, but having a garage there and a fuel station would save thousands of miles a year on your buses. Likely help with hiring of bus drivers also. And so we feel like this is an important piece of every option that's out there. And again, I must have pushed something there. We do have, in this case, where the 85 projected intermediate students from Creekview to Raymond does, again, relieve some of that middle grades capacity. Again, pre-K at all elementary schools except for Raymond, and then a minimum of 2 self-contained special ed. In this case, Creekview and Bunzl are given additions to increase the capacities to 1,400. Now, if you look at right now the 5-year projection, 1,400 might seem large. But in this case, if this were an option to move forward, this is a solution. This is a 20 and 25-year solution. This isn't just an overnight solution. This will make sure capacity is there for as long as the foreseeable future for the district. Also, again, looking at district-wide boundary adjustments in this. And I think that's going to be something, regardless of what you do, as we move forward in a facilities plan, a district-wide boundary adjustment is likely ahead of you. Now, not that there's a whole lot you can do among the grouping, but just trying to keep balanced enrollment over time. And again, so for option 2, the results, a little stronger support in this, about 38%, a little less, about 31% do not support this one. And again, some are unsure about that. And so, and then just some of the kind of comments around there, very similar to option 1 regarding Raymond having a 6th grade, comments are the 5th and 6th grade. Option 1 about keep pre-K is still a concern out there. There is a question about Edgewood's annex, and then can Edgewood be a renovation versus replacement, and what would that look like? And so I think that it's going to be our due diligence to see what the long-term cost of renovation and longevity of that school building would be compared to replacement of that building, to give the board some more background on it to make decisions on that. Some feel like this one's too expensive, and this one is an expensive option. If you look at, if you do kind of just a napkin math of future debt possibilities with all debt retired, this one pushes the limit a lot to get back to that number, and which wouldn't leave the school board and the community a lot of flexibility after that, bonding your dollars for so long. And so, and again, some questions around where an elementary would be placed. And that's an obvious question that people would ask, where would that be? And I'm sure a lot of people would like to know that. And again, if this were something that we were to go forward on, this is something that we would have to make part of our plan. Our third option is quite a change to the district. It would be converting to a pre-K 5, 6 through 8 grade configuration. with replacement and new construction. Again, the replacement of Edgewood, a Raymond renovation, a partial demolition. This would keep Raymond at a pre-K-5. And all elementaries would be converted to that K-5 with Creekview actually being a K-5 and a pre-K center on the other wing. So Creekview obviously was built to be, it could be 2 schools within a school as it's constructed. And with this option, you can see that we would take a new elementary off the table and then make Creekview the elementary and then use the remainder of that building for a centralized pre-K center. Again, minimum self-contained special ed at each school. This one would construct a new middle school, and this would likely be on the Bunsold site as it could handle it. I think that it'd be a feeder school for, you would have 2 feeder schools. You would try to direct your feeder schools from your elementary to go into those schools. But the nice part about this, and I think there's a lot of questions around, okay, 2 middle schools on a site, what would that mean? Well, actually what it would mean is quite a bit of flexibility. A lot of questions around, well, we would have 2 football fields, or we would have 2, and keep going down the list of all those things that people would ask. But I think the beauty behind it is all the shared services on a site, but also the flexibility of 2 schools on a site. Whether it be programmatically, whether it be grade configuration. I think we got some comments. Could we make it a 6th grade center with the 7th and 8th in the other building? All those kind of things that allow for flexibility. I also think that specializing in the middle school programs allows you some capability to do that. Even students that were in feeder patterns to go to one versus the other, if there were more specialized programs in each one, the adjacency will allow for students to kind of shift back and forth to leave it more like one community campus. So the flexibility of 2 middle schools on one site is, the possibilities are endless. Frankly, they're endless in this. As a middle grades instructor a long, long time ago, that's a pretty exciting thing to know that your middle grades would have that, which again, increased fine arts opportunity, increased athletic opportunities, increased CTE opportunities pushed down in the middle schools. There's all kinds of advantages to doing this. Again, we would look at district-wide boundaries to balance those because we would have to, and then we would do a feeder pattern kind of review to figure out what elementaries would feed in to the middle grades configuration. Overall support, about almost 60% people supported this option that responded to the survey. Very little non-support, under 20% non-support towards this, which I thought was an interesting kind of difference in the two. And as we talk to, it's interesting the list of the task force members also, that they see the benefits and challenges of each one. But even if you listen to your community task force that's been deep in the data, and we talk to the leadership of the schools, and we talk to the leaders in the district, we feel like that, and all those groups kind of feel like this is a direction that would programmatically align to what Marysville should look like in the future in this grade configuration. So I think one of the questions that we ask ourselves in this is that, okay, say you can't go through a building program in some way, shape, or form. Is there still pathways to get you to a K-5, 6, 8 district? And so we'd have to explore that. If that's a programmatic direction of the district, then the program should drive the facilities. And so if the district chooses that grade configuration pathway, then we would figure out the plan to accommodate that funding or not, and to move in that direction. But also knowing that, with the current Bunsold probably couldn't hold that much enrollment, so how would you still go into that configuration? So we'd have to look at that. Again, most people seem to support this, believe that this addresses long-term needs in the district, and it does. This offers quite a bit of capacity across the district, both on the elementary and middle grades level. Probably, again, you never say never, but the likelihood of more seats in the next 15 or 20 years would not be needed in a plan like this. So the district would be very, very well secured through the life of their bond program for capacity. And it also would offer long-term flexibility for you, because you do have buildings that have a lot of flexibility. I think Creekview is a great example of flexibility in the center of this district. And so I think this does offer that. Again, I'm not up here recommending anything yet, but what this did, and looking at and listening to the task force, even listening to community members, they felt like this did provide that. Now, interestingly enough, even with a middle school on this and not having to build the elementary school on this, this is about a $25 or $30 million less option than option 2, believe it or not. So it leaves flexibility within your debt capacity for the future, to give you flexibility as a board from a financial standpoint if needed. Or it gives you the possibility then to maximize those dollars and invest in some of the schools that aren't listed necessarily on this list right now, but be able to invest in those buildings where they're necessary for long-term component replacement. So I think it gives you some flexibility either way. Again, questions about operations of middle schools is always going to come up, and that's a kind of a programmatic discussion that we engage the community in. And I think that's an exciting conversation to have with the community, to talk about all the possibilities. There are some traffic concerns, obviously, there will be in that Mill Valley area if Creekview does convert. It's a pretty condensed area when it comes to population and housing, we know that. And so those are some operational things we think about in the long term. So do we have to stagger some to relieve some of that congestion, or can we stagger operationally so we can accomplish that goal? But I do think when we're talking about those, traffic and walkability and those kind of things, I think those are operational issues. Buildings are where they are. We're not going to pick up buildings, unfortunately, and move them. But I think this is something that we should talk about as we go through and have some of those solutions, even in a facilities plan. So the options comparison across the board, as you can see, that most people favor that option 3 as you walk through this and see the financial benefits and long-term benefits of it. So with that, our next steps are we do have a task force meeting next Tuesday night to go over these again. The exercise will be, okay, task force, sit in, we're going to do small group work once again, and we're going to ask the task force to do some interpretation of the data themselves. I'm not going to pretend to interpret the data for them. Let them do that and start to give some feedback on if this is what we're hearing from our community, from the data that we see from our first survey. Also, remember we had 1,200 responses to our first survey that they're very well in tune to. What are some suggestions as community members that we think are good things to think about in the recommendations phase? Again, the task force job is not to provide recommendations. That's Diane's job to provide the recommendation to the board. And the task force is aware of that. But their feedback has been very valuable in this, and listening to suggestions to what they have will be very valuable to our final product. Recommendations work session where we come in, we sit with the district for a day, and we're going to kind of plow through all that, all the community background, all the data, the board input that we've gotten, and make sure that we come to the pathways of recommendations that we want to get to. The task force meeting on the 19th will be to kind of just review that. And again, they've been our double checker the whole way, making sure that, hey, that math looks right and the data looks right, and we feel like this is what we've been hearing and seeing. And then working with you, working toward an April 17th kind of board presentation of a final recommendation. And again, that's flexible, it'll be up to your schedule too. And the intent is to try to meet with you all in between there to make sure you're prepared as we walk into that meeting with any feedback you might have. And so we have that goal also of, much like we have in the past meeting, as we have, to make sure that you're aware of how those recommendations are coming forward and any comments and concerns you might have before we hand over a recommendation to you that we want to include in this. So with that, any questions that you might have, I'm glad to take.
Thank you. I have a couple, I guess. One is, since we're an anomaly and we're growing, at what point would we have to build, as in start construction? And I guess number 2 is, what happens if we suddenly are not the anomaly anymore and things go the other way? Because that's happened in this district once in my lifetime.
Yep. To answer the first question, I think that that 28, 29 year, you're hitting an overcapacity year. And the problem is you can't retire debt until around that time. What my suggestion would be is if you think that you could move forward with a building program, or if the board decides they want to move forward with a bond program and an ask to the community. I've seen strategies and just local strategies also with school districts I've worked around the central and Columbus area, is that they've engaged design professionals early and used dollars that come out of either reserve funds or operational funds to make sure everything is designed, permitted, ready to dig day one. So let's just say that it was to replace an elementary school to get you more capacity or build a new elementary school. We'd want to make sure that as soon as the bond passed, we could start doing, dirt work and all that to keep construction at the elementary down to as close as 12 months as we can to get in front of that. Right now, we're behind the 8 ball. If enrollment were to change, now the thing with that is that your birth data right now is still projecting that 5 years out to be maintaining that grade level. And so you're in this trend for the next 10 years anyway. And so you're not getting out of that trend for the 10-year, even though you may stagnate after that. But what it would do is provide you, and I think that the worst case scenario that you would be at the middle grade, you might be a little over capacity or a little overbuilt. I think that's the worst case scenario. I don't think at the elementary school level you could be overbuilt with the extra seats there. So I think you're fine there. But I would, and we can work with you, continue to work with you as we move forward to think about how do we, if we were to decide to go after a bond program someday in this district, how can we get in front of that capacity issue sooner? And I think we should work toward that.
I'm just a little curious about the seemingly large number of people with a neutral opinion on all 3 options. Did you get any feel for why they were neutral or unsure?
Yeah, so I think what happens is that you see the neutral responses for the responses that they don't support. Like, so they may have skipped 1 and 2 because they like 3, or they didn't do 3 because they already like 2. And so sometimes that's where the neutral comes into play. And then there are people who take the survey that want to be involved in the survey that their school may not be impacted by it. And so they don't see that to happen. It could even happen, so like, and I wouldn't say this exactly happened, but I can think of a scenario where the Raymond folks would say no because they didn't want K6, and since the last one had a K5, they were like, okay, that's the one I want, so I'll just be neutral on that one, So I think there's possibilities like that. Other than that, it's hard to explain why they might be neutral, but that's what typically we see in the surveys. That's an excellent question. Nobody ever asked that question, so I appreciate that question.
Another question I had was in regards of the overall assessment of condition of the buildings. So can you give me just a highlighted version of what you found in condition?
Yeah, so overall, your buildings are actually in pretty good condition, even the older ones. I think it's a testament to stretching your dollars as far as they can go, and to just, it has to be to fantastic maintenance crews. That's the only way that they stay this way at this age sometimes. But here's what's going to happen is, especially those older buildings, you're going to see those escalation of components goes quicker, and so the life of those are going to accelerate. What we don't want to get to, and I have to look at the data again really quick, but what we don't want to get to is to a point where your condition index, remember that FCI that we talked about? And I'm not so concerned about the percentage as I am the number. Like, I wouldn't want the district to get to a point where affordability of the deferred maintenance starts to escalate quicker than you can keep maintain it. And so that's my concern. And what'll happen, because regardless of what situation, your money doesn't grow as fast as the needs grow, unfortunately. And so what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to prioritize in that one diversion of plan where there's no capital funding. We're going to have to make sure that we are prioritizing those major systems. So when I'm talking major systems, roofs, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing, that those are top priorities for replacement when they need replaced. That way you're not caught in a situation, or you're not passing the situation to the next board members behind you, an unattainable number that you can't take care of anymore. So that would be the plan.
So just quick question about especially mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. Part obsolescence, is that a big issue that comes into play with older buildings, older equipment? I just replaced a furnace a little while ago, and we just couldn't get parts to replace it, so we had to go with the new one. So I'm sure it rolls to schools as well.
It is so true of schools. I mean, and take your house and compound it by, I don't know, 1,000, because that's exactly what happens. The parts that go with the parts, as you stretch through the building, that's where it becomes very, very difficult. I'm even working in a district right now, a smaller district just outside of Birmingham, that they're replacing roofs on 120-year-old buildings that have wood structures. And so trying to find roofs that structures can hold in today's world, they don't even fit together very well. And so what happens in that situation is that the life cycle of that roof is reduced up to 20% because you're not fitting it right on the structure that wasn't intended to hold roofs of today's standards. So I think that's a really, that's even the ones that we want to pay attention to, it's really important to get in front of those and identify when those are going to need replaced.
There were two things. One is, and I'm just checking my understanding, option 3, people in the Raymond area were concerned about their kids being isolated. And the option 3 seemed to eliminate or quell some of those concerns because all the buildings would be structured grade-wise the same way.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And in the comments on option 2, it's talking about renovation of Edgewood. Now, as I've been in there, renovation would be significant cost because you'd have to remove interior walls in order to create additional classroom size and so forth. Am I correct on that?
You are absolutely correct. And then you concern yourself with the age of that building. That most contractors and design professionals, they want to tell me that, look, if you're going to renovate a building of that age and of that kind of era, it's like a 1.2 multiplier on cost to new construction because you open the walls and you just don't know what's there.
Yeah.
And the unknown, and you can do as much forensics as you can, which costs you as much money as just tearing the wall down and seeing what's there, right? But that's the fear with those older renovations,
Okay.
is escalation of cost and retrofitting of systems to that point. Yeah.
So in looking and thinking about this, I looked and Eisenhower was president when that building was opened. So
Yeah, there's been a couple things that have happened to education and to, I don't know, power and energy and technology since the great President Eisenhower.
thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for being here tonight. I've been impressed with your presentations. I was able to go to the community focus group, the community session, and we've met prior as well. Some of my questions are going to probably be repeat questions, but can you walk us through what did the task force look at when you looked at new developments coming to our neighborhood, looking at the building, where homes are being built and where our schools are at? What was that conversation like with the members of the task force?
So that's such an excellent question. I think one of the things that that people are concerned with is just how condensed the current elementary schools are and how that affects traffic patterns. I'll give you an example. Like one of our first kind of iterations of the options, we had a circle on the map where an elementary school could be, and our task force members were like, the growth and where the traffic goes like that a school can't work there. And so that kind of feedback was very valuable. Now, the other piece was you do have a site that you could build it on an elementary you could build on. That would be good because it kind of disperses that traffic a little bit and heads towards growth. The other thing that you always concern yourself with, and I think everybody concerns themselves with, is that when you build something, does it prompt more growth or does it draw people toward it? And I know that's a concern to some Marysville citizens. And so paying close consideration to where those buildings are going to be is going to be important. You don't really, you own some land, but it's always not in the right spot. The district's been smart about land banking some things, but we have to be really careful with that. That's why I think that even with the Creek View option, we're not, as an elementary school, I think one of the benefits of that is that it doesn't prompt more growth, because it's already there. There's no more condensation you can do, or putting people together there. So I think then when the task force thought about that, they were really thinking wisely. about not spurring more growth that's not necessary and investing where our schools already are, because we're kind of used to that anyway in our community. So I think that's one that we're going to pay attention to.
Did they have an understanding of maybe the east side annexation?
Yeah.
And how there's going to be residential growth going down 36 to the creek, and then growth between 31 and Route 4, and eventually it's going to all... My concern, I guess, let me get to the point. My concern is, I think elementary schools are great neighborhood schools, and we're going to have a section of our community that is not going to have on the east side or the south. You know, we still have, right now we have Adena Point going all the way to Northwood, which doesn't sit right with me and it creates traffic, and it creates congestion, and it creates delays with busing and all that stuff. I understand how expanding Edgewood's capacity can help alleviate the southern region of our city. We're going to have other neighborhoods coming down 38. There's neighborhoods, I know we start getting into Fairbanks District, but there's still going to be some developments, potential development south of Adena Point as well. And so trying to think about that, shoving all of our elementary students to the north end of the city seems like that's not a good city. I'm not a city planner. I'm not going to pretend to be one. It doesn't seem like that's good for the community. Am I wrong?
So no, you're absolutely not wrong. And that's something that the double edge of that sword is exactly what I just said, is that it doesn't spur more growth if you keep your existing footprint. I think the other component to that is that because it has never really been entertained to just abandon a school that's in the kind of cluster of elementary schools to build a new one and kind of decongest that. That's kind of a pathway we haven't explored even with your community. So if it was, obviously the replacement that we have on here is Edgewood, right? So what if you didn't rebuild it there and you rebuild it somewhere else like you're talking about? What does that do? And that's just an example in my head, because that's the only one we've identified for a replacement like that. The benefit to the second option is that elementary school is wherever you want to build it, and you can do that. And so I think this is something we need to think about as we go into recommendations and kind of peel the layers of this onion back to figure out how we do that. Look, again, if that were to be consideration, we'd probably have to take a step back and maybe go out and talk to the community again. And that'd be fine. I mean, you don't want to press something to just get it done, right? So we should explore that. I mean, I just think we have to, based on that.
Thank you. The only other comment I'll have tonight is to help me, maybe the community, understand the timeline of some of these options. Because I understand we can't just replace an elementary school. We're going to probably have to build a new one first, like for option 2, or relocate to Creekview and then rebuild. So understanding those timelines, like I know they're going to be rough ideas, but just understanding the lead time of a new build, this school will have to relocate, or what that timing looks like. I don't know if that's your role necessarily, but I would like to maybe get a firmer grasp on the time. How much time do we have to put things in place? Because it's been my position, I don't know if we're going to make it to 2029 for our elementary buildings. And so I'm kind of wondering, how do we get there, one, and then what's the timeline of execution in the quote-unquote perfect world, which is, we're not in the perfect world, but in the quote-unquote perfect world, what's that timeline of execution?
So as much as I'd love to give you an answer on that now, so during the recommendations phase, again, one of the nice parts about our company is that we have a construction division, we have a program management division, and our construction is different than our program management. But on our team, we have program developers and pre-con people that are going to help us on schedulability, costing over time. Because what we do have the costs escalated right now, but we got to nail that down too. Because if it's 3 years down the road, our costs look a little different. We think we have it kind of in there, but we want our pre-construction people to look at it. We want our program development people because they know schedulability. Because we do know that, look, if it's an elementary school, you'd like to get design and permitting in that kind of, 8 to 10 month period if you can. And then you'd like to get that construction period from 12 to 16 months, 12 to 18 months. But you're right, it's not a perfect world. This winter would have been a hard winter to complete a project in the 16 or 18 months, right? But a middle school is 30 months on a general schedule. Now, you're right, we'd have to build a middle school first, which doesn't help our elementary capacity. And if we got to wait till 2031 or which is likely 2031 to have something open, we're 2 years behind a capacity issue. And so I know there's been questions, and I know Diane gets these questions all the time. Why are you doing this now? Why are you doing a facilities plan now when we're still talking about levies, we're still talking about that? Well, this is the reason we're talking about it now. I mean, I think you all recognize you're not in the boat alone when you're worried about capacity. You should be worried about capacity already because it's coming. Your elementaries are not going to have that room. And so there might have to be some options around temporary solutions or thinking about operationally how you're going to do these buildings a little different to make sure that your classrooms aren't sitting at 32 kids. And so, look, I do think it's a pressing issue for you in this matter. And so more space is going to be needed somehow, whatever that means. And it's either going to come out of a bond program or it's going to come out of your operations from getting modular facilities that come out of operations, not capital. And so that's, and you all know your budget constraints. And that becomes more of a budget constraint from your perspective as board members. No question.
The only thing I would add, Mr. Ferguson, on that conversation about putting something on the east side, because you and I have talked about that more than once. The conversation really in the task force has centered on, with our inability to pass operating funds lately, what do we think the community could get behind? And kind of the solution with a new elementary certainly drove that option 2 cost significantly higher. And there was concern that that would be something that the larger community would be willing to fund, even with it doesn't fit within the scope of going in for a no new millage type ask. And that was a concern.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean your point isn't valid. I just think it was a concern from the task force.
To that point, I do think we have to have an option that includes an east side school site because we right now we're in a crisis as a community, and if we're making decisions with like the brace on, I can't, I'm an injured athlete, I'm going to play differently. We are still trying to build 30 years out. This is a long-term plan. And so what makes sense for the community? Personally, having Bunsold there, I understand that was a blessing to the district, but having all of our middle school students go to literally the edge of our district, in my view, I understand it was a blessing at the time, acquiring that site.
Right.
But it's also creates from a community, having all your traffic in the morning go to one point of the edge of the district, not more centralized, it can create some issues.
Sure.
And so trying to prevent that from happening in my generation, because my kids will probably be in some of these schools. At least one of my, I have a 1 and 3-year-old, so maybe my kids will get to see some of these new schools. And so I'm trying to make sure that their peers, or when people are looking at me 30 years from now, they're like, what decisions did you make? Why did you make that decision? I have a good answer, so.
Yeah, well, point well taken. We appreciate that.
Was there any other information? The survey results showed for the middle school, the community divide for 2 middle schools. Was there anything else that was really shared? I mean, I kind of was thinking along the lines of Jermaine, but some of that you already said is operational. You can stagger the start times of those buildings. You can add a traffic light. You can do things to help with that. But I was just wondering if there's anything else shared in regards to the 2 middle schools.
So I think that what's difficult, I think, and I would think, and I'll say this with all due respect to the community members, that trying to understand like 2 schools on one site isn't something that comes naturally to people, right? But the thought process that went behind that, and I think some of the concerns obviously were, and I think it's a valid concern that all students go to the south, right, in middle school. But operationally, from a transportation perspective, buses are fuller, you're going to one destination, you got one start time, it's a pretty convenient way to do it. Staffing efficiencies at 2 schools on one site mean you have flexibility to flex staff in and out. And even grade configuration or program offerings. So I think that once if there's some education to be done, it's an education to be done if that decision gets made. And I think people would become more comfortable with it. And I think that as they're involved in the conversation of, as you move forward on this, I mean, it's something like a football field. I mean, let's just go down that route. People are like, well, will there be 2 competition fields? Well, I work in districts all the time and have 4 high schools that only have 1 competition high school football field, right? They all have good practice fields, practice facilities, good soccer fields and all that. And so you weigh your pros and cons of it. And so I think that part of the comments that we would see from the middle school were more like, I'm not exactly sure how that would work. And that took a couple rabbit holes, and which I could understand. But I think that, again, our thought process was very operationally efficient if another middle school were to be built from that perspective. And you don't see it very often. If you ask me if I could give you examples around the country, it'd be hard to name 5 off the top of my head of 2 middle schools on one site. I know that in Hilliard we have a district that has 3 sites that have 2 elementaries on it, and they work pretty awesome. And so I'm not really worried about 2 of the same school on a site. So that's a long answer to the question, but I do think the concerns were more of, I'm not sure what that would look like.
We heard kind of both things too from athletic and activity standpoint. Like, would you have 2 sets of teams? Some people saw that as advantage. More kids could participate, but other people saw that as competition. And so talked about, well, they could never play each other. Well, that might be reasonable. Or, is one wing 6th grade and then you have a 7th and 8th? So there were all kinds of questions. I don't think anyone's landed on anything at this time, but I think there was a overall feel that 2 middle schools provided more opportunities for kids to be engaged in more positive kind of activities, and to be careful about that consideration about competition that you might create unintended consequence really with that.
I also had a question, and maybe no one knows offhand. What is Bunsold's capacity?
If you give us about 5 seconds, I talk real slowly,
and then
I look over at Matt.
The other question, I worked in some buildings where they were built to add on.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if Bunsold, because it is newer, was built that way. Like there's electric and plumbing and a certain wall that helps you tap into that. I was curious about that as well.
We do have options for expansions on those buildings anyway, so there likely is potential for that. Not big expansions. What I start to worry about when you start to look at, like a Bunsold, I would worry about kind of your core of your building. You add 8 classrooms to get 200 more kids in it, and then all of a sudden your cafeteria is too small. Or those are the things you worry about. And so even though back when people built buildings like this, they said they were expandable, did they really build the core to be expandable? And I see the head shaking no, and it's usually no. But it was good verbiage when they were selling you the building, right? But so we'd have to really take a look to make sure that we could do that. But the other possibilities are this, is that you reuse space to convert to classroom and build those spaces that you need for core. And so there's all kinds of possibilities. But what we do know is that there was a couple buildings that we had, including Bunsold, for a little expansion in case we went to that direction. 1160? Yeah. I was going to say 1100, but I didn't think it sounded. I knew we had an odd number in there.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
And now we're up to the superintendent's report.
All right. Kindergarten enrollment started, so that's kicked off and underway, and we're actually trending right about exactly where we were last year. Last year we had 26 students enrolled for OK. So far we have 29. And then for regular K, this time last year we had 232, and right now we're at 227. So trending very similar to last year's numbers, which we would expect. Overall enrollment is at 5,624. Last night, we had parent council, so it's our third parent council of the year. Student learning group discussed our new math framework and used parents for feedback into that framework. Our safety committee talked about, they were interested in threat assessments and how threat assessments work, so Mark and Ryan walked them through that process. Community partnerships, we did an overview of our satellite programs that are offered with Ohio High Point. And then the Finance Committee had some beginning discussions about the upcoming levy and district facts. We have several, we have several openings in the district, but three that at this point we're taking a lot of focus on, which would be Northwood principal, the Bunzel Middle School principal, and special ed director as well have all been posted. That's all I have.
Okay, and any questions?
Just quick question. Have we had any interest in the buyout that we were offering to retirees, or do you have any information on that at this point?
I apologize. We have till March 15th to respond to that, so we have a little bit of time, but we have received a few that you'll see tonight, retirements on the agenda. And then Lynette held a retirement meeting yesterday and then today again, and it appears we have some people that are attending those meetings that aren't on the list yet, so it may ignite a few more.
Okay, thank you. Treasurer's report, Todd.
Okay. Tonight I've got an update. So, we've shared a lot of data that comes from Ohio Department of Education. So all that data was just recently updated within the last month. So I'm just going to share an update here. If you're a data person, you're going to love this. It does paint quite a picture of our financial performance. If you're not a data person, get your toothpicks ready and, prop up your eyelids. So the first statistic, and one that we've really talked a lot about, as we've said, we have a revenue issue here. So now we've got the data for fiscal year 24. Fiscal year 24 revenue per pupil, the state average is a little over $18,000, whereas Marysville Schools revenue per pupil in fiscal year 24 last school year was $13,385. So we're about $4,800 below the state average when it comes to revenue per pupil. I put the prior year number up there as well. Fiscal 23, the state average was $17,000, whereas our number was $12,170. So you can see statewide, the average revenue per pupil went up significantly. I would say most likely is because there was a big influx of state funding in fiscal year 24 compared to fiscal year 23. We weren't the only district that saw very large increases. And as you can see, our revenue per pupil went up significantly as well due to that 3.5 million-ish increase in state funding that we received. So even with that significant increase in funding that we got, fiscal year 24, we're the 19th lowest revenue per pupil in the state. That means that 97% of schools in Ohio have a higher revenue per pupil than Marysville schools. This graph here shows the revenue per pupil of Central Ohio schools. You probably can't read that very well, and I'm happy to share this with anybody who wants it. It shows Marysville is at the top, or at the bottom, so to speak. We have the lowest revenue per pupil in Central Ohio. We did just last week get state funding simulations, so the governor released his version of the biennial budget. It's going to be House Bill 96. So fiscal year 25 that we're in right now is the last year of the biennial budget. So that means fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27, that's going to be a new biennial budget. So we're waiting to find out what state funding is going to look like there. What we have so far, based on what's been presented so far, Marysville is showing a reduction of $226,000 for next school year compared to what we received this year, and then an additional reduction of another $189,000 for fiscal year 27. So that means our fiscal year 27 funding under this proposal would potentially be $414,000 less than what we received this school year. So that's not great news, but let me give you worse news. That's looking at actual dollars, but you have to also consider what we were forecasting, and obviously the levy is based on the forecast. So the forecast had assumed we're receiving an annual increase of $240,000 in state funding each year. So that decrease is kind of compounded because where we were looking at a potential increase. So if you take that into account, the forecast actually, fiscal year 27 funding would actually be down almost $900,000. So that would be a pretty significant impact. If you look at kind of put it in perspective, 1 mill generates a little over $1 million for us. So you're looking at close to one of our mills being used, what we wanted it to be used for staffing and blah, 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 but it's going to be used to basically replace lost state funding. So that would not be great. Main reason that's we're not the only school looking at a decrease in funding. There's a lot of schools that would be losing state funding next year under this proposal, is because they've updated the local capacity, but they left base cost inputs the same. So what does that mean? So local capacity is your communities, your school district taxpayers, their ability to pay local taxes. So that's going to be based on income and based on property taxes. Well, in the last year, we've seen significant increases in property values due to the reappraisals, very significant in Central Ohio, and incomes have gone up as well. So we look wealthier as a community. The state says you can afford to pay more. Well, at the same time, they did not update the base cost inputs. Well, the base cost determines what does it cost to run a district. How much do you have to pay a teacher? How much do you have to pay for different impacts, different staffing levels, all those kinds of things. Well, they left that at a fiscal year 22 level. So they're still assuming you're paying the teacher in fiscal year 26 the same thing that they were getting paid in fiscal year 22. So in essence, what they're doing is manipulating the formula. So, the question of, is this a good formula or a bad formula? It really doesn't matter if you manipulate it so that you can give schools less by changing those numbers. And, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't get in the middle of the presentation. When the formula was set, was the cost inputs and the local capacity supposed to be updated at the same time? Or what's the right way to do it? Are there, I'm in my mind, local capacity and cost input should be updated at the same time, not one ahead of the other. But this is not the case here.
Right. Well,
did the original formula say you have to do both those levers at the same time or no?
Well, I don't think that there's a have to. I think that I'm sure when the creators created the formula, it was those things would be updated annually, but that doesn't mean the state legislature has to do it that way.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, we got a sizable increase, and that was because if my memory is right, they updated the cost inputs from 2018 up to 2022. And what I see our legislature doing is creating, again, this kind of gap. In talking with Mr. Cupp and Patterson about this 10 years ago, when they first started looking at this, their idea was that if the full funding was put in place and the cost updates were done on an annual basis, that after FY27, the only thing the state legislature would have to do is update the cost factor, because you would have fully funded what you considered to be the full cost of of educating a student. It doesn't cover the full cost, but under the formula, it would have done that. And the goal was for the state legislature to have smaller, more manageable annual increases in terms of state funding, because it's just a matter of the cost factor, basically cover inflation.
Sorry, you have a fault. So when the governor said that they implement the next phase of the formula, I thought that at that time that there's more money, but that's not the case when you're updating the next phase.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I've gotten that question a lot when we've been, kind of giving levy facts and talking about funding. People's, got the idea, or I guess had the idea or the hope that, well, if they're going to fully fund this formula, maybe you're going to have a big influx of money coming, and, then you won't need a levy. Well, fiscal year 27 is 100% fully funded, and we're going to see a decrease of over $400,000. I mean, that shows you, I guess, one, the ability to manipulate the formula, and two, the importance of increasing those cost factors. And then, sorry, go ahead.
Do you think, it seems like the state legislature is getting a lot of heat on this right now, maybe just in my circle. Do you see that changing anybody's mind between now and July or not?
I wouldn't even want to speculate on that. I mean, I think it would be beneficial for our community to reach out to legislators and talk about the impact of what it does to our school, what we're facing, and what a decrease in funding would do. I mean, that local capacity number, if you're a lawmaker, looks fine, because you're saying, well, your community's relatively wealthier, so you can afford to pay more locally. Well, it means nothing if you don't pass a levy. All that means is, yes, you can afford to pay more, but you're not getting any more. And by the way, we're going to take away some more state funding as well.
I don't want to get ahead of your presentation. I think maybe I am. Are we on the guarantee? What is the guarantee part of the formula? Are we on the guarantee or not on the guarantee?
We're not on the guarantee yet. I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head. I think the guarantee is it's a percentage of a prior year number, like 95%, and it is a declining guarantee. So it's not one of those things where you're on the guarantee and that you're just set. If you're on the guarantee, it could be a slow decline. So, but we wouldn't be there yet. Now, the potential silver lining here is my last bullet, is these numbers, these projections. Well, I guess two potential silver linings. They could change one way or the other. This is only the first version, so the House and Senate will provide their versions. So the numbers could get better, they could get worse. Who knows? So that's where reach out to your legislator and tell them we want the number to get better. But these enrollments, these estimates are based on January 2025 enrollment. So that is what that basically is saying, is it's assuming our fiscal year 26 and fiscal year 27 estimates are based on stagnant enrollment. If our enrollment would continue to grow, likely the decreases wouldn't be quite as bad. It would still, we wouldn't reach our forecasted number, so our forecast would still get worse, but we likely wouldn't see quite the dramatic drop that we're showing here. So depends what happens with enrollment.
So just a quick question. Our forecast includes the plan that we would hit the 20 mil floor, and that we would receive increased funding based on that, based on current state law?
Correct.
But there's been legislative movement to eliminate the 20 mil floor. And if they would do that, that would drastically impact our forecast in a negative way.
Yes.
Do you have any idea to the tune of what?
No, I do not. There's multiple factors that would could impact that one way or the other. So to make a guess, I mean, it could obviously be in the high six figures to the low millions, but.
Okay, thanks.
And I would say that traction with 20 mil floor seems to be legitimate. Adam and I are going to meet with a couple people from Fairbanks, again, to talk through those impacts for both of our districts, looking at funding. But there seems to be a sincere interest in the elimination of the 20 mil floor.
When do you expect that to happen?
I can let you know.
Oh.
I figured I'd let you and Jermaine know, since you guys went to the one with Tracy.
And just while we're at it, we still don't have any estimate of the solar money that's supposedly coming to the district, when that might come in, and that is not part of the forecast, correct?
It's not in the forecast. I think a potential estimate would be fiscal year '26. But again, we work with a consultant that works with close to 200 districts across the state, many of which have solar farms. I shouldn't say many, but some of which have solar farms, and their recommendation has always been, don't count your chickens before they hatch when it comes to solar money. Moving on to expenditures per pupil. So state average for fiscal '24 was $16,300, whereas Marysville schools for fiscal '24, our number was $13,600. So we're about $2,700 below the state average on expenditure per pupil. And you can see that I put the last year number there as well. We were also below average last year. Marysville Schools has the 103rd lowest expenditure per pupil in the state, which means that 83% of schools have a higher expenditure or are spending more per pupil than Marysville Schools.
Can I ask a question? Because I see our expenditure number went up despite our contingency plans that we had. Is that because student needs?
The biggest driver, the biggest driver for fiscal year '24 for expenditures of why it went up, I'm not saying it's the only reason, but the biggest reason was ESSER. So if you remember in fiscal '23, fiscal '22, we had all that staffing that was being paid out of ESSER. They were in general fund. We put them over into the ESSER funds when we had the ESSER money, and then fiscal '24, that money was all gone, so they came right back into the general fund. That is the main driver of the increase. Looking at our Central Ohio graph there, you can see we have the second lowest expenditure per pupil in Central Ohio. If you can't read that, Hamilton Local Schools is the only school district that has a lower expenditure per pupil than us. Whenever you're talking about a levy, administrator expenditures always comes up. So our fiscal year '24 administrative expenditure per pupil, state average is $2,200. Our Marysville Schools administrative expenditure per pupil is $1,462. So we're about $750 below average, below the state average. And interesting to your point, Jermaine, if you look back at the prior year, we actually dropped on the administrative expenditure per pupil side. So that ESSER money had no impact on administrators because there were no administrators getting paid out of there. But some of those administrative cuts that we've made now show up in fiscal year '24. So you can see the decrease there. So we're actually the 40th lowest administrative expenditure per pupil in the state. So that's out of over 600. We're the 40th lowest. So 93% of schools are spending more on administrators per pupil than Marysville. So we're pretty lean.
Can I make a comment to that?
Yeah.
There's this, I'm not going to name the district, but there's a different district that just announced their contingency plan, and they had elementary vice principals, which I didn't even know, like, I'm sure, I'm from Marysville. I didn't see that when I was a kid, and we don't see that now. So that was like, wait, there's vice principals at the elementary level? So when people say we have a high administrative number, other districts are doing way more. And that's just one example, so.
And not to belabor that point, but I think what's important in that comparison is looking at our outcomes for students. When you think about those comparisons and think about our outcomes for students, I think it speaks and is a testament to the quality of staff we have.
So looking at our Central Ohio graph, you can see there Marysville Schools has, the second lowest administrative expenditure per pupil in Central Ohio. Student-teacher ratio, again, another major factor to look at when it comes to expenditures is how many teachers do you have. So the state average this year and last year was right around 20 students per pupil. Marysville Schools, I'll look back at fiscal '23, we had 24 students per pupil. Then some of those cuts that we have made, show up now in fiscal year '24, so that number jumped up to 26. So 26 students per pupil compared to the state average of 20. So what, in essence, we're saying, if you look at the average Marysville classroom or the average Marysville teacher, there's 6 more students in that classroom than the average schoolroom classroom across the state of Ohio. That's a significant jump. So Marysville Schools actually has the 5th highest student-to-teacher ratio in the entire state. So top 5 out of 606 districts. That number kind of jumps off the page to me. That means that 99% of schools in Ohio have more teachers per student than Marysville. And then if you look at our current contingency plan, if this levy were to fail, not all of those 30 staff members are teachers. So if you just look at the teachers, the regular classroom teachers that are in there, in that cut list, we would then be actually the highest student-teacher ratio in the state of Ohio if that contingency plan gets implemented. And again, looking at Central Ohio, we have the second highest. The only district ahead of us is Groveport-Madison. And we, again, with that contingency plan, we would pass them.
Just a comment on that particular slide. That is not a list that we want to be on, okay? No. That is the worst list for a child's education that is out there. We, top 5, top 1, that's, as a community, that's embarrassing, okay? And we really need to come to terms with that what are we doing to our children with that kind of ratio? It's going to be very difficult to provide a good education. I would put our staff up against any staff out there, but we are working our teachers and our staff to death. It's wrong.
The next statistic is the local tax effort. State average is meant to be right around 1. So fiscal year '23 it was 1.06. State average this year for fiscal '24 was 1. So a factor of 1 basically means you're right as the number is designed. You're right in the middle. The taxpayer is paying about the amount that the state would expect of local taxes towards the school district. And that's all relative. It's based on, averaging the numbers across the state. So Marysville Schools, we were at 0.53 in fiscal '23. Last year, that went down even further. We're at 0.45. And I know local tax effort is a number that a lot of people have trouble understanding. So the easiest way to talk about it is just it's how hard or how easy is it for a local taxpayer to pay their school taxes. If you've got a really high number, it means you're working really hard to pay your school taxes. If the number is really low, it means it's relatively easy for you to pay your school taxes. And that's based on wealth or lack thereof and tax rate, whether that tax rate is really high or really low. So if you've got a relatively wealthy community and you have a relatively low school tax rate, you're going to have a low local tax effort. And obviously there we have the 12th lowest in the entire state. 98% of schools in Ohio have a harder time paying their school taxes than Marysville Schools does. And again, this local tax effort, I'm not saying it's exactly the same as local capacity as in that state funding, but it's related. So this is a number that the state looks at and says, you can afford to pay more locally. Why would we give you more state funding? And again, there in Central Ohio, you've got 2 districts below us when it comes to local tax effort, and that comes into, if you look at the intricacies of local tax effort, you're talking income, you're talking tax rate. The two districts below us, they do not have lower tax rates than us. They have higher tax rates than us. So why are they below us on local tax effort? Because they are wealthier communities. They relatively, and according to the state of Ohio, they could afford to pay more than the typical Marysville resident. And again, this isn't to say that, you know, everybody loves paying taxes or it's easy to pay your taxes. This is just a relative to all of Ohio. Finally, performance index, state average was 79.1. Marysville Schools is 94.5. So good news, we're still well above the average for the state. And I think it's too early to say there's a trend because we're just looking at a couple years here. But you know, I know there's a lot of people concerned at, you know, look at that student to teacher ratio and our staffing changes and programs, and you know, is that going to end up impacting our performance index? As you can see, excuse me, the state average actually increased from fiscal 23 to 24, whereas our number actually decreased. So not to say that there's a trend for only 2-year period, but if you look back at fiscal year 22 compared to 23, we actually increased by almost 2-point-whatever percentage. So we had a significant increase, and so now we've seen a slight decrease. Again, not to say it's a trend, but something we definitely want to keep an eye on. That performance index score puts us in the top 17% of all schools in Ohio. And there you can see there our ranking in Central Ohio. I think that's, what are we, about 7th or 8th there. Some of the districts ahead of us, obviously, some very quality districts. That's it.
I just have one question. Do you know the split between state and local share? Like if we had a pie and are we 50, or you know, like what's that divide? I know it's on the presentation, but I'm curious.
It's close to 50-50. Okay. It's not 50-50, but it's relatively in that range.
And I'm guessing we're lower. I'm guessing we're lower than where we need to, like, because the formula is supposed to be a shared responsibility. Are we lower than when you look at local effort, does that mean that we're lower in our share of responsibility? Is that a way to describe it, or no?
Well, I don't think the state says, here's how much money you have to raise locally.
Understood.
You know, the state's not saying you need to raise this much money. It's really the community that decides, you know, what kind of school do you want. So the state's not going to say you need to have a better school. That's up for the community to decide. I think you could look at evidence such as that local tax effort, the revenue per pupil compared to other districts across the state that would say, yes, we're underfunded from a local standpoint. But again, that's a local decision. Yep.
No more questions? All right. President's report. We had a city school meeting, subcommittee meeting, and Mr. Smith and I attended that. That was last week. The city shared and acknowledged the importance and community impact of the upcoming levy. And without saying too much, I'd say they're on our side. And then we shared a resolution that's on tonight's agenda for this evening. Both parties showed support for this resolution and in hopes of continuing to improve city-school relationships. They helped us formulate one line of it or two, and which was appreciative. Then we had did I cover that?
Yeah, and I had written a page to kind of explain the resolution, and that was very well received. The comments at the table were very positive. There was, I think it was the second paragraph, there was a suggestion that the wording be changed, and their suggestion was very positive. Didn't change or alter the goal of the resolution. So, and I would say that city administrators, members of city council participate in that discussion, so.
The Facilities Planning Committee meeting, we heard tonight some results from that. And I attended one of those, and I think, were you there, Jermaine, also? And we had a decent turnout of members. I was impressed. Very engaged in the task provided. My hope is that no one comes up to me in 10 years and say, when did we discuss this? I'm scared of that because it's out there. Please look at the school website and get involved if you're not already. Got a call today from Wade Lucas. Superintendent search is underway. He expects us to have 10 to 12 applicants by the end of next week, which is the second and final week of that. So, and that's all I have. Oh, we did have a board coffee in some terrible weather, and one person showed up, and we sat around and talked about how to pass a school levy. So, and let's see here, what's next?
Student achievement. Just a couple of things to highlight. I sent a list to you, a lot of highlights from all the buildings, but I wanted to highlight Little Mermaid production for the Creekview students. 93 students participated. That's probably at least 10% of their student population. And to see the parking lot jam filled and have more of an audience than the boys or girls basketball game, that's pretty cool. Also, in addition to our National Merit Scholar, we have 2 MHS students, Linnea Olofsson and Levi Weithman, that have been nominated for the U.S. Department of Education Presidential Scholars. Only 20 girls and 20 boys from each state in the U.S. are nominated.
They'll both be here next month, too.
Oh, great.
Yep. And also the high school National Merit students will be here next month.
Okay, we're down to legislative report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Some noteworthy updates. I want to try to keep this shorter than last time. We did hold a legislative meeting with Representative Richardson. We actually set up a combination, Fairbanks, North Union, and Marysville all met together. We obviously discussed the fair school funding formula, some property tax reform because she was on the previous task force. I think we kept our time to about 47 minutes, but it was a very impactful conversation. So I was appreciative to her for letting us, opening up her office hours to us. Secondly, we have, there's a webinar. The Fair School Funding Work Group is going to host a webinar on Monday, February 21st at noon. I included the Zoom link, so you can just, if you haven't got the email and you haven't registered, I plan to attend to just learn some additional information about the formula. So, and where things stand right now in the current environment at the State House. OEPI did a review and summary of the Ohio Auditor State Longitudinal School Finance Study. I'm not going to go in it, but I did attach it here. I think it's important to kind of look at. I'm not going to summarize it here right over. There's some key takeaways, but I think it's very interesting. It's looking at school, analyzing spending, revenue, and enrollment in Ohio public schools from fiscal year 2000 to 22. So, and it does take out the federal, like the COVID dollars, it's not including that cash infusion. It's looking at, how are we spending, like the level of spending, the level of expenditures, and enrollment. And so it's pretty good information to kind of understand the long view. If you're getting questions of like, well, the state is spending more money in education, that answer's kind of true, but the student needs are definitely drastically different. But just look at it. I don't want to summarize it here because I don't want to misspeak either on public record. There's the state legislative conference with OSBA. on Tuesday, March 18th. I'm not going to talk about the budget. I will say this. It's titled House Bill 96. The House Finance Committee, they received their testimony from the Director of DEW. Now the House Education Committee will receive public testimony this Tuesday. So it looks like anyone can submit testimony if you're interested. It starts at 2:30, and they have potential may go into recess until Wednesday, depending on the number of people who want to testify. So if any of us wants to do that, let me know, because maybe we should, since we've gotten the presentation from Todd. That's opened my eyes up a little bit more about maybe the situation of the cost inputs, making sure those are in the.
Yeah, if you can't
Include it.
attend in person, you can submit written testimony. That becomes part of their record, so.
And so if members of the community, obviously you're welcome to do that as well. A few bills in the Senate that are introduced. I'm marking these down. I don't know if any have traction yet, but I'm just kind of putting it on our radar. There's Senate Bill 3, which would phase down the state income tax to a flat rate of 2.75 over 2 years. The question was asked, how does this impact the school funding formula? And they believe that it would spur economic growth by lowering taxes is kind of the theory behind it. However, I would say that that's not happened yet, right, from our tax receipts. And that's kind of, people in the State House know that, and they're wondering, is there a lag, or they understand that. So, but that's, Senate Bill 3 could lower the state income tax to a flat rate of 2.75%. Next is Senate Bill 93, Senator Brenner. I'm very curious about this one. I don't know if it has any traction, but it declares the General Assembly's intent to establish a new school financing system that provides statewide per pupil funding payment to public and chartered non-public schools based on a single statewide property tax and increased state sales tax. So it's only like 7 pages long, obviously, or no, it's only 1 page long. Sorry, this one's only 1 page long. It's just declaring an intent. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of study, and this is not going to impact this year's budget. This will be for future, but that's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds and if there is traction behind it. It would change what we just talked about tonight, 100%. Next is Senate Bill 19, which is our math improvement and monitoring plan, beginning in the 25-26 school year. I know there's a version of this last General Assembly. I'm not going to claim to be an expert on this legislation, but if it's going to impact next school year, if it gets traction, then we need to start keeping an eye on this. And I'll call Diane to let me know the impacts of it.
So our work along our math framework is definitely aligned to kind of where things we believe are headed. So the challenge will be what the recommended intervention time is. So as you know, with our reading improvement plans, there's a recommended high dosage tutoring. We're already aligned to be able to staff that. If that is the same requirement of time, quite frankly, in our current situation, we do not have staff that could provide that intervention in high dosage tutoring.
Thank you. Next, there are Senate Bill 2 by Senator Reineke. This bill is going to change the competitive retail electric service law and electric company property taxation. There is a companion bill by a different legislator in the House, House Bill 28. I'm sorry, it's not House Bill 28, it's House Bill 15. So obviously, anytime you see two bills in two different chambers, there's going to be some traction. There's a movement behind both of those. I think this will impact the tax rate of utility, tangible property tax on the utilities. Again, we don't need to dive into it deeper, but I'm putting it on our radar because there's two bills moving in both chambers. Senate Bill 34 would require public school boards to select at least one of the bill's listed historical educational documents to display in each classroom. I think display in each classroom is the point that is generating more concern than the other, the list of historical documents, just because how do you regulate that? How do you fund that and make sure we're all in compliance in every individual classroom. However, that bill has been introduced and has been assigned to a committee. House Bill 28, on the House side, House Bill 28 will limit the authority for levy replacement property tax. Will eliminate the authority to levy a replacement property tax levy. And we did talk about that briefly with our meeting with Representative Richardson. And in both chambers, there is a School Bus Safety Act, and I believe in the budget, there's some dollars allocated to the School Bus Safety Act. Both chambers have slightly different versions, but there's going to be some school bus safety reforms happening this year in the budget. So that's good news, I think, depending on how the final product looks like. So that I'm not even going to talk about DC in this report because I don't even know where they're at right now with some education reform policies. I'm not trying to be funny. There's noise. I just don't know exactly where they're going to land. So thank you, Mr.
Drug and Safety Committees?
That's a transition from Jermaine to me.
Oh, okay.
And there's been no meetings or updates, so there's no update there.
Okay. And let's see. I need a motion to approve the draft minutes from the January 16th meeting.
So moved.
And a second.
I'll second.
Been properly moved and seconded that we approve these draft minutes. Any discussion? All in favor?
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson?
Yes.
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Katz?
Yes. Then we're down to Board of Education items, a resolution regarding tax incentives and Huh? Did I skip one?
Policy. You have a first read policy.
Oh, I saw that, but it's not on here.
Yeah, you
Okay.
you have first read policies.
First read policies. We need a motion to accept. Well, actually, we just read them.
Yeah, make sure you're familiar with them. If you have any questions, make sure you're reaching out to us. They'll be up for approval next month.
They look like they're just state
There's just one policy.
laws.
It's
Yeah.
only one.
It's one policy that makes minor adjustment to the executive sessions requirement due to state law. Nan and I, we've met as a policy administrative committee and reviewed it, and it's a couple word changes.
I was going to say, I think it's one word, but it might be two. Yeah. in
Okay.
there.
There's a word and a comma and a deletion of a word.
All right. And now we need a motion to approve the resolution to negotiate directly with developers over the terms and conditions of tax incentives and compensation agreements. Need a motion before we can discuss that.
So moved.
And a second.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I assume that everyone has read it, but do you want me to read it? Nobody wants me to read it?
I don't want to speak for everyone else, but there's not a need to read it to me.
Okay.
I did have a question just about some of the language. Like, I was thinking business developer, maybe those aren't as viewed as the same thing. I don't know. What if I guess my question is if some of the language isn't the way things are presented to us, do we have this resolution still to support what we're trying to do with whatever organization it is we'd like to speak with? Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I understand your question, but I think the overall intent is that it forces developers and/or businesses to deal directly with the board on tax incentives that are beyond the state minimum.
Yeah, as you asked that question, the thing I thought about was Nestle recently in town asked for a tax incentive where they said they were going to move some jobs to Marysville from Dublin. They've decided not to do that, That was an existing business here in town that was asking for incentives. And so most of the language in here was done by the attorney, so.
That's good to know. I am not an attorney.
Yeah.
Nor I.
And I hadn't thought about that, but that was what I remembered, which I think would get covered by this policy. I think I can say that one of the things, as I read this, is the intent is to put on paper the actual practice, because we are currently talking directly to developers and the past practice has been improved dramatically. The city has placed a moratorium on residential TIFs. They changed zoning wording to make apartments conditional and not permitted in commercial areas and so forth, which are things which were problematic for the school system. And as I said, this goal of this resolution, from my standpoint, is to put on paper what the current practice is, because we've had verbal agreements, we've had additional statements and so forth, and this doesn't mean that we're now competing with anyone. Growth is going to occur. Growth is a good thing for the community and a good thing for the school district. And it just simply says that, under the current arrangements, the negotiations are done, in large measure, have been done by other people that are not accountable to this board. So this puts in the language and says we catch public comment for things that we've agreed to, and in my mind, this says we will be more involved in that process. We will be in person in those negotiations. So,
I have a question.
Sure.
I know you said that this would put in on paper our current practice. Last month, we approved an agreement, an abatement, which is an incentive, and also the compensation agreement with Amazon. Did we deal directly with Amazon?
No, we did not.
So
But
that
should
would be-
we have?
But, so it's not.
Should we have?
Is not the current practice. We need to clarify that.
What?
Right? Hardy World, when we approved the abatement for Hardy World, did we talk directly to the developer for Hardy World?
no, and I find that to be a problem in both cases, because we don't have firsthand knowledge of what the developers are interested in, nor do we have the opportunity to educate them as to the needs for this district. And I understand the point that you're making.
I'm just asking for a
Okay.
clarifying
Yeah.
remark for
And,
that we
yeah.
are putting on paper what is currently in practice. That's all I was asking.
Okay,
So,
it has past practice, okay?
so since exiting the EDIP, which we have done now, and the one-year time period has expired, we don't have anything in writing of what our process is at this point. And the city / economic development group would like us to enter into a new EDIP. So this is what I would, personally, I would view this as a transitional document to state what the board wants to see moving forward.
So there were conversations about a new edict?
There are no conversations with the board about a new edict, but the city is, or not the city, what is it, CIC, huh? CIC Corporation is proposing a new edict, which to me looks exactly like the old edict, but that's their proposal at this point in time, and they have not made it formal yet. It's still in a draft stage.
Yeah, I read the front page of the newspaper today, and I know the county commissioners have some concerns with the current edict. I would like to maybe have a presentation what the current version of the edict is. I would maybe like to hear from our economic development director about the economic development process. What's that process flow from a company looking at our Marysville or Raymond or any other area of our school district? Because I'm curious, what's the process flow and when we would be up to negotiate? Because this resolution, there's a phrase here, it says, the opportunity to engage directly with developers without the influence of local governments. Now, I don't know if that's practical because there's the local governments, there's going to be the CIC most likely, but I want a presentation to maybe understand, is this even possible that we can engage directly with developers without the influence of local governments? The abatements and the agreements that we've all have voted on and have approved have been multi-party with local governments. There have been arrangements between the company, the city, and the school district. And in my understanding, and I think we all need to kind of have an understanding before we make this decision, we need to just have a baseline understanding of economic development, the process flow, when we could engage in it, because there's going to be a person who's going to have to hand off the company to us. There's going to be influence because typically we've known from previous developments, there's usually one pot of money that is then divvied up between the local jurisdiction, the political subdivisions. So there's going to be influence and there's going to be intra negotiations as well. So therefore, I move to postpone this motion until our regular meeting on July 17th, 2025, to give us some time to review the terms of this draft edict, to receive a presentation, and to make an informed decision before we put something in writing.
Is there a second?
What date was that meeting?
July is our regular, I move to postpone this motion until our regular meeting on July 17th, 2025.
Is there a second? No second. Dies due to the lack of second. Any further discussion? I guess I would just like to say that there should be no one that is not directly responsible or report directly to the school board that is, what do I want to say, negotiating with school funds and school taxes. I think our job as board members is to protect those funds as much as possible. While I understand the need to build the community, I think that's very, very important. I'm not sure I'm willing to give away school tax dollars to do that. And, you know, one other thing that people aren't maybe thinking about here is that when we agree to a tax abatement or a tax incentive, we're actually asking the taxpayer to pick that bill up. And while that may bring some development into the community, it doesn't, it may not pay for itself. And we're you know, really hurting our kids by doing that. Yeah, maybe down the road, 20 years, 30 years, that's two sets of kids, I think, on a 12-year scale that we're going to affect by not having the funds that we need. And if we want to continue a good school district and give that money away to developers, then we're going to have to ask the community to pick up a bigger portion of that. And I think there's other ways to do that. That's all I have for now. Any other discussion?
Yes, Mr. President. We just approved an abatement with Amazon, and we had a conversation with the Economic Development Director. Did we ask to meet directly with Amazon as a board?
No,
Why?
I don't know.
So,
I was
well,
told
hang
they,
on.
I was told they would not meet with us, that they did not
Yeah.
want, they would not meet with the school district.
So what, in that case, what would happen when a company is trying to move and locate to our community and bring jobs that are high-paying jobs? Because if they're requiring our approval, they're probably going to have a significant payroll. We're going to get a revenue share from the city. They're going to bring high-paying jobs and construction jobs on top of that. What's that going to look like if we have this resolution in place where, no, Amazon, come talk to us? What does that look like?
Well, I think it looks like if they don't want to come talk to us, they have a better offer somewhere else, or they're going to go somewhere else. I also would ask you this question: how many millions of dollars are you willing to give away and write the check for that are school funds to these businesses? Even if,
can't give away
no, wait a
money.
minute.
We
Even if they're bringing in $2 million payroll, it doesn't pay out.
So why did this board approve multiple abatements during our time, both of our time? We've served in the same amount of time. We've both have supported multiple abatements. Now we're changing the course.
When should we change the course? Yesterday, or last year?
What we're
In fact, you were on the board, I believe, that helped get us out of the edict.
What were my comments in that vote?
Huh?
Do you remember my comments? Why I said we were going to leave the EDIP to give us time to negotiate?
I don't
a new
remember.
EDIP? Well,
We've had
I've been very
3
firm on
years
my-
to negotiate a new edict,
We
and they
have
keep
not.
coming back with the same edict.
The EDIP is still being negotiated right now. It's being drafted right now. The county commissioners do not even, it's going to have to be worked on. This is the time to negotiate. Let's have a presentation. We're voting on something where we're not even going to entertain it, and I haven't even got the version of the EDIP. You have. That's it.
The previous EDIP did not provide to this school what state minimum would have provided. Now, I don't have any connection to the original EDIP that was put in place. It went through a number of minor changes and so forth. But at the time we pulled out of the EDIP, from my point of view, it was the right thing to do because our district was getting less money than if minimum state law had been applied. This doesn't say that we're going to not approve incentives. It doesn't say we're not going to have meaningful conversations. It doesn't mean that we're not going to cooperate with the city. It doesn't mean that we're not going to cooperate with the county economic development. It simply says that we as a board would like to have an independent opportunity to talk to people that are asking for incentives so that we can communicate to them what the impact is on our school district, and for them to be able to tell us why the incentives are important to them and why they need to come. And then we can make a decision. Now, if there is an EDIP that is created 6 months from now, a year from now, and we want to modify this resolution, we can do that. But at this point, there's no EDIP in place. We have developments that are on the table and are moving forward. And I think that this is the right time for us because we get criticized for accepting incentive packages and so forth. But we have only in the recent months been able to have some significant influence on what those arrangements were. And this just says we want to have those conversations. It doesn't say anything about any incomes. It doesn't say we're not going to cooperate with anybody. It just says that we are going to act as our own agent because the economic development director is not paid and is not accountable to this body. And city council is not accountable to this body. But we are accountable for the agreements that are put in place for economic development. We're accountable to the taxpayers and to more importantly, to the students of our school district. And so I think this is the appropriate step. City council has, and city administrators did not express any concerns at all. They didn't see this as a problem. They asked, they thought that one paragraph could be worded a little bit better, and Bill and I agreed that it made it better. It was a very appropriate thing. So the city has had an opportunity, at least some of the members of the city have had an opportunity to do this. Now, others in the community may say, well, you're trying to throw roadblocks in the way and all this kind of stuff. And that's not what this document says at all. So.
The section 1 in the resolve clause says the board hereby expresses its intent to disapprove all real property tax abatements and incentives that will require its approval under Ohio law unless it's provided with the opportunity to engage directly with developers without the influence of local governments. That clause, without the influence of local governments, is not practical. It will not happen. There will always be an influence of local governments because economic development in every school direct compensation has local governments involved, the CIC and the city, and the developer needs one person to talk to that community, the developer or company. I take qualms with that we're saying developer is a company because a company is not a developer. We've just spoken to a developer who is not a company, right? So if you want to, it needs to be
you
either.
can discuss that with our attorney.
I
fine.
can't discuss that with the attorney. I don't know how that goes through the administration.
Okay. All right.
Let's be real.
Here's the thing, and I think people are forgetting this, is that we're having this argument over the remaining 25% of the tax revenue that should be coming to the school, that they have the right to 75% of the tax revenue that should literally come to the school district without our say-so. And we want to say, if they want the other 25%, we want to say on that. And I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't understand why you think it's unreasonable.
Because we didn't do that with Amazon. We did not ask them to come. We did not make that a requirement last month. We just woke up one day, brought a resolution saying, you know what, we're done with this. But during our time, we've approved every abatement that we've been brought. Connect. We did talk to Connect because that's a transformational, that was a significant investment. We did not talk to Amazon. We did not talk to Hardy World. So it is not current practice. And we have the ability, before we vote on each one, this one is telling me, hey, no matter what, if we don't talk to the developer or the company, we have to disapprove it. That's the intent of this resolution. That's the policy that we will approve. This carries risk of turning jobs away from our community. I know what it says. I read it. It's right here.
Jermaine, when we talk about influence, when we have to talk through the city to the developer.
We don't talk to the city or their developer. We talk through the economic development director.
And that was the next thing.
That's not the city.
That's the next part. The next part is, when we have to talk through the city to the developer, we talk through the economic development director. And that was the next thing. That's the next part. what we've done in the past, I misspoke, all right? And I understand that. But I think we need to change. And the fact that we've done things one way shouldn't prohibit us from trying to improve the situation for this particular body. We need to advocate for the kids in our school district. We need to advocate for public education in our school district. And I'm concerned that the people that are engaged in the discussions early on are not pushing that point enough. And I want to have the opportunity to sit and to talk to people that want to come to our community, that are willing to invest big dollars. And I want to talk to them and tell them our story. And I want them to understand that our kids in this district deserve a quality education, and that they have a responsibility as members of our community to help in those costs. And we can certainly work that out. And this does not mean that we're going behind anybody's back. It doesn't mean that we're cutting anybody out of the loop. The economic development.
We're cutting ourselves out of the loop.
Well,
this strategy carries significant risk. We will not be involved in any negotiations at all. Ohio BIA put out a statement saying that they want the state legislature to change the law so that schools are out of any incentive conversation. This is going to be an example and a public testimony to a state legislator, because they're going to say schools are making it more difficult to bring jobs to Ohio. I want my peers, I want my community members to have more jobs in Marysville. That's how we're going to pay taxes. If I have an income, if I have opportunity through economic development, then I can pay my taxes to support the public entities. If I don't have income, if I don't have more jobs in my community, if I don't have more private investment in my community, then I don't have enough people in my community to afford the homes that we're building with the cost that we're here. We don't have those jobs. We need to attract jobs.
I totally disagree with the economic development has been overblown in Marysville's community immensely. The promises that have been made for economic development and high-paying jobs has been completely overblown, okay? We have not received the benefits that have been promised all along. And the person in charge of economic development for this area has no interest in representing what's good for the schools.
Have we discussed that with him? Have you met with the economic development director and said, we believe that you don't have our best interest? Last night there was a chamber event. Guess who was a speaker? Tammy, our schools were at the event as a speaker at a chamber event, but we're here saying that person doesn't have our best interest in mind. How many times have we had tours at our early college high school? How many events? We had the STEM solutions. That's being channeled and worked with through the chamber, the CIC group. So when we say they don't have our best interest in mind, why did we vote for the Amazon abatement if that wasn't in our best interest? Why did we vote for the Hardy World abatement if that wasn't in our best interest? Why did we vote for the Connect abatement and the TIF if that wasn't our best interest, working through the person who is in charge of economic development?
In part because of state law that lays out mandatory requirements, and also because we have, withdrawing from the EDIP, created a situation where this body had a little more of a voice. And as a result of that, the city has stepped forward and said, in some situations, we will share the income tax in order to make this more attractive to the school district. In some situations, and we were talking about the data center, they were willing to front load the pilot payments, which gives us money sooner and keeps that money more valuable, gives us more spending power. We have been able to do that because we have been at the table And we've had an opportunity to talk, not to the builders and developers, the businesses that want to locate here, but we've talked to the other agencies, and we will continue to do that. I don't see any change there. And so I hear you and what your concerns are. I disagree.
The person who made the request on our behalf to front load the pilot payments was our economic development director who represents our community. And the company said yes. That person made the request. So, like, we're double speaking here a little bit. And it's
Well,
okay, the votes are here.
I could
The
tell
votes are
you
on the
that
floor.
I talked to him before that ever came up and asked if that was a possibility. So I don't know that that was an original idea of his.
No, but he made the request on our behalf, and we received what we asked
Yeah,
for.
don't you think it would be easier to negotiate 1-to-1 than
I
1-to-3?
think if Amazon said they are not going to do it, we're going to be cut out, and we're going to turn companies away that are maybe interested in our community because it's going to be a harder process. This strategy carries significant risk to our community that we're not thinking. We one meeting pass an abatement, the next meeting says we intend to we intend.
No, we intend to negotiate.
No, it says expresses its intent to disapprove
Unless we negotiate.
without the influence of local governments, which is not possible.
Matt, do you have anything? I think everybody else has voiced their opinion.
These types of situations are tough for me as a board member. I signed up and ran for a board seat because I care for our kids and our staff. And I feel as though it is not my role to decide what is best and not best for the community as a board member. It's to decide how that affects the education of our kids. And I don't feel that this is a barrier between us and the city because I was told you sat down with the city and showed them this, correct?
Yes.
And they agreed to it, correct?
Right.
They were aware of it. And so I feel that this is a layer of making it known from the city's behalf to any developer or business that we do want to have conversations about our kids and their needs. People on the city do not know that. They don't know what our kids and staff need. We are supposed to and do. You visit schools, you talk to teachers, you talk to your children, and you know. So for me, I don't feel that this is a barrier for the city to do what they need to do. I also don't read this as this is something we have to do. It says we desire to engage. If we're presented something that is good for our kids and our staff of the school district, right, and the education of them, I don't feel that it's a barrier for us. So I support it.
Okay. I think we've heard from everybody. We'll take a vote at this point in time.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes. And let's see, what do we have from here? Approve the treasure items. Need a motion to approve all treasure items.
So moved.
And a second?
I'll second.
Well, is there any discussion on the treasurer's items?
Really,
Starting
it's
with the
just the
treasurer.
normal items. I would just point out a lot of donations on there, and thanks for those in the community that are supporting the schools.
Any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Keller? Mr.
Yes.
Mr. Ferguson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Keck?
Yes. And then we need a motion to approve the following items with Mr. Ferguson abstaining, to approve Jermaine Ferguson as a volunteer.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Yes.
He can't vote.
Abstain.
He's abstaining. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Yes. And superintendent items. We need a motion to approve superintendent action items.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion?
I'd just like to highlight a couple retirements. Scott Forney has been in the district for 27 years, so wish him well in the next chapter. I know I just talked to him yesterday. Michelle Kaufenberger from the middle school. She's been here 14 years, but a lifetime as a student and outstanding advocate for our community. So we'll miss her as well. And then Rob Hildreth, band and music teacher who was retiring after 27 years of service here, but certainly more in the world of education. So all of those people have made a significant impact in our students and community and with our families. So thank them for their service. And I would just also point out, I'd like to congratulate again Mike Young as our head football coach. That's in that part of the agenda as well.
And so if we don't vote for this, they can't retire, and we don't have a football coach.
That's right.
Okay, double-edged sword there.
Yeah. On the retirements, Scott, Michelle, and Rob have all been people that I've worked with and admired for their professionalism, their knowledge, and most importantly, their concern and care for kids. And they certainly, as they move on, they certainly leave a significant hole in our school district. And I know that that they have put every ounce of effort that they have into trying to make the lives of our kids better by providing a quality education, guidance, and support. So I wish them well.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll take a vote.
Ms. Savage?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ferguson?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes?
Mr. Cass?
Yes. And we're up to comments from the board. Start with Jermaine.
Yes, just thank everyone. I know it's been a rough couple months with weather and school closures and delays, but from my point of view, it seems like everyone, when they is still engaged and excited to do. I know we have a lot of administrative retirements, and which is I want to honor everyone who is leaving and serving, but also feel a little risky because we have a lot of turnover. And with the data that we looked at tonight about our student achievement is because of the people who are retiring. And it's because of our current staff. And bringing new people on, we're going to welcome them with open arms. But we also have to do the real work in increasing our resources through our local tax dollars to make sure that we are not the 5th highest student ratio. When I came on board, I wanted to lower ratios. That was one of my things, and never would have dreamed or wanted to wake up 2 years later or 3 years later and say we're the 5th highest student ratio in the state of Ohio. That's heavy, and we need a reversed course on that. I also want to wish Honda Marysville a happy 20th anniversary. Honda Marysville and Bruce Daniels, Impact 60, have been a significant player in our community. They've invested a lot of money and time and resources into our students, through our stadiums, through the TAP program, through the Auto Lab, and also opportunities. When I was in high school, I had a high-paying job because I was a lot washer, and me and a couple of my friends got a chance to wash cars and drive brand new cars in and out and detail them, and that was a high-paying job of $16 an hour at the time. That was an opportunity. Now, years later, my wife works there, and I serve on Impact 60's board, and Impact 60 has given a lot back to our community. And so I just want to highlight them and thank them for their service and impact to our community.
Mrs. Savage.
I wanted to kind of jump on top of that and just say thank you to all of the groups that are providing money to different entities within the school to support different activities and different areas of the arts or different areas of sporting goods. Thank you for the community and all the people that volunteer.
Mr. Geller.
Bear with me a moment. I just sat down today and was looking at some of our athletics going on. Big congratulations and/or best of luck to these groups. First of all, boys basketball, gymnastics, wrestling, and bowling starting their postseason tournaments. Congratulations to varsity cheer for getting first and third in their respective competitions, 2 different ones. Swim team, Brady Cordonier, 500 free, best of luck. Girls wrestling, state dual runner-up. Boys wrestling, OCC champs. Varsity basketball, girls district final this weekend. Allison Price reached 1,000 points for her career for the girls. The 8th grade boys basketball team at Bunsold went 20-2 and won their end-of-season tournament. 7th grade boys went 18-1 and placed 3rd. 7th grade girls placed 3rd at end season tournament. 8th grade girls 5th place, and middle school cheer 2nd place in their competition. And after I absorbed all that in as a board member, boy did it make me feel glad we gave them the opportunity to participate with pay to participate fees, and boy does it make me want to work to lower that with the passage of a levy.
Mr. Smith.
Todd mentioned that there were a lot of donations, and our community has been very generous in supporting a number of things. Students at the high school created the Monarch Market to provide food for kids that had food instability over weekends or during the week or whenever. And we have an organization that supported that with a sizable donation. So it's a great collaboration from my point of view, between our students and our community. I'd also wanted to point out that with all the other great things our kids have done, at the STEM school, the Ohio STEM Learning Network Design Challenge submission was chosen as one of the top in the state. And the students that were involved in that have been invited to do a showcase of that. So want to thank them. I want to echo what Jermaine said. Honda Marysville, Bruce Daniels have been a great asset for our school district, and certainly want to appreciate that. And also our athletic teams have performed teams and individuals have performed very, very well, and they're all headed to outstanding events. Wish them absolutely the best.
Yeah, and I don't have much to say except that Matt's right on target here. I get a whole bunch of Facebook postings all the time about our athletic department, and they just continue day after day. Sometimes there's 2 or 3 a day. I don't know how you compiled all that, but
Looking at social media.
yeah, looking at social media, but you know, it is truly awesome, and you know, we don't sometimes post the academic successes, and I'm sure that those are occurring also. We wouldn't be in the top 17% if it wasn't, and you can't have those successes in athletics if you don't have some academics behind it. So. It makes me very proud to be associated with this school district, always has. That's all I have for tonight. And I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we adjourn. That's the only motion I haven't had to ask for the second on. Just hit me. Anyway, it's a privileged motion, therefore we'll vote.
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Keller?
Yes.
Yes, we're adjourned.